Line with Mark Hungerford and Ryan Nideck. Our special guest tonight is Becky Norton Dunlop of the Heritage Foundation. Take it away, Mark.
Well, welcome to our show, and we're very privileged to have Becky here tonight. We did a full disclosure. We did Reagan, but I saw that you really have been involved in the conservative movement for such a long time, and today is really kind of an interesting day. I mean, it's a sad day in that today's the day, obviously, that Rush Limbaugh has died, and for 30 years or 30 plus years, I can remember listening to him in the late 80s, well before Ryan was born. But any thoughts about kind of his role in the conservative movement during that period of time?
Well, it is truly a sad day for us just to lose a great human being and someone who I think gave voice in an enormous way to the conservative views and the principles that we share as conservatives. I'm sure that there were other talk show hosts before Rush Limbaugh. I used to know some of them, but they would be like in New York or LA. And Rush just took this to a whole different level and made us all feel very connected. And of course, he also gave birth to other talk show hosts like Mark Levin and Sean Hannity and Mark Stein. Others have learned and benefited from Rush's leadership. But really, I think that he helped the conservatives across America identify in a very specific way what we believe and why we believed it. And I just can't, it's just hard to believe he's gone. We all had such high hopes that he would beat this again, but what he has done for our country, when Ronald Reagan left office, we needed Rush Limbaugh. And Rush Limbaugh really has helped keep the conservative movement, to setting aside the Republican Party for a moment, but the conservative movement energized and focused on the future and what we can do. And it's a great loss. It's a great loss.
You may want to indulge my background as a communications lawyer, because it's actually fascinating. You mentioned other talk show hosts. What's instructive is that it really was because of a regulatory change during the Reagan administration, challenged the FCC's fairness doctrine, that allowed for talk radio to flourish. Before then, there was this idea that broadcasters were somehow utilities, and therefore they had to pick one of each, or like a Noah's Ark kind of principle, not recognizing obviously there were lots of different stations. And so it was really very, very shortly after the change in the fairness doctrine, this idea of, every opinion has to be balanced with one other opinion, that allowed for Rush to get going. But we digress. I wanted to kind of acknowledge that, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of share some of your thoughts about Ronald Reagan.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you folks who are really neighbors of those of us who live in Arlington County. We have the same politics in our counties. It isn't good. But let me just say, before I speak about Ronald Reagan, I want to put on everybody's radar screen HR 1. This is Nancy Pelosi's seminal piece of legislation that she's advancing. And of course, Chuck Schumer is following her pretty little footsteps. We're not really sure where Joe Biden is, but we know he supports it too once they give him the talking points. But this bill is probably the worst piece of legislation that we've seen come down the road on Capitol Hill in many, many years. And I just encourage all the club members and everybody who's watching, who really cares about a republic form of government, to pay attention to this bill and reach out not only to your elected representatives. In our cases, we don't have ones who listen to us, but you might have family and friends across the country who have members of the House and Senate who pay attention to them. let them know this is something we who love liberty and a republic form of government have to pay attention to. So I just put that on your radar screen and switch to my favorite topic, Ronald Reagan.
So why don't you elaborate just a little bit about what HR 1 does?
Well, essentially, it is the whole ball of wax that the Democrats have been trying to achieve for many years. I guess a shortcut way to say it, once they want to federalize elections, they want to be able to have control of all the levers of power in one centralized place. They did get control of a lot of levers of the electoral power in this last election, but it wasn't enough for them and it wasn't permanent. And they know that. And they know they're going to overreach. And they know that if the states and the localities and the state legislatures continue to control the electoral process, that freedom-loving Americans will fight and come back in 2 years. So that is a very shortcut way of discussing it, but the Heritage website, heritage.org, can give you a lot more detail on this. And of course, Heritage Action is deeply involved in this effort. But I know that, we who are members of the party pay attention to these things. And so I just wanted to put that on everybody's radar screen tonight.
Thank you. And now Reagan.
All right, let me shift to my favorite topic and the topic you asked me to talk about, and that is Ronald Reagan. Gosh, what a great American he was. He was a hero for the entire world, not just the United States of America. I was making notes as I was preparing for tonight. On February 6th, 2021, he would have been 110 years old. And, we try to recognize him every year, the Reagan Alumni Association on his birthday. We haven't been able to do that this year because of this Chi-Com plague, but we still all remember what a great leader he was. And born in 2000, died in 2004. And we remember, those of us who lived in this area and loved Ronald Reagan, remember even his funeral united the country. It's worth going back on occasion when you wonder if there are any heroes in our lifetime, and just looking at some of the footage from his funeral, which was magnificent and really paid tribute to a great man. But, Ronald Reagan was a principled man. He was a principled conservative. George Shultz is quoted as saying he knew what he believed. And I add, and why he believed it. He was schooled as a youth. His mom was an important mentor as a mom for him. She helped him understand the principles that are taught to us in the Bible. And he lived by those as a youth and growing up. And then, of course, he in Hollywood fought communism as a union member and president of the Screen Actors Guild. He understood the evils of communism, and that set him in the course to fighting against communism. And then he got involved with General Electric. Back then was a great company, and they hosted a couple of shows on television. And he learned from some of their top leaders by going out and talking to factory employees of General Electric more about the economic freedom and economic growth and the free enterprise system and entrepreneurship. And he became a champion of that and was very, very articulate at expressing this. So he ran for governor of California, was very successful as the governor, dealing with some of the same animosities that we saw in the recent years, if I might say, on college campuses and on the streets of some of our larger cities. And when we ran for president first in 1968, he had a small but very devoted cadre. One of those young people in 1968 was George Dunlop, who's my husband, remembers going to the 68 convention for Reagan. But then again in 76, he He ran, and I was active in that campaign. I worked in 5 states for candidate Reagan, finishing my work in Texas. And that year in Texas, Ronald Reagan won all 100 delegates. You had to win by congressional district, and swept the state, all 100 delegates in the state. But he did not get the nomination in 76. And the conservative movement after that really kind of spent its time and effort getting more deeply involved in the Republican Party and being prepared to nominate him if he ran in 1980. And we were delighted that he did. He ran in 1980. The convention, if you can believe this, was in Detroit, Michigan. That's before the crime syndicate took over that city, and got the nomination, and away we went. He knew and communicated to the people of the United States of America his principles. He communicated that he cared about them. And if you will recall, Ryan, you won't recall, but the rest of us, many of us on this call will recall, he was very popular with young people. It had an enormous following among the young people, college students, and young people, high school graduates, and young people who were in the workaday world. But he communicated that he cared about people. He wanted anyone who wanted to have a job to be able to get a job. So he wanted economic growth. He wanted to free the economy from the malaise of the Carter years. And he knew we had to rebuild our defenses, because in those days, Soviet communism was taking over the world. I mean, it was on the march through the Far East, through Europe, through Africa, through South America, Central America, and on the college campuses here in the United States of America. And he wanted to, he never really articulated the words defeat communism, but he said we need to rebuild our defenses so that we can defend the people of the United States of America against this enemy of communism, which was a very strong military force at the time. So his 3 principal focuses when he was elected, and it's always wonderful to recall, he was elected very early in the evening. So we all got a good night's sleep because we knew Ronald Reagan was going to be president by about 9 o'clock on election night. But he basically said to the American people, we're going to restore economic growth to our country so that everyone who wants to have a job can get a job. We're going to rebuild our defenses so that we are prepared to defend American people so they can always be free. And we're going to restore the American people's belief in themselves. Again, Jimmy Carter talked about malaise and America's best days were behind us. And Reagan just dismissed all of that and said, we've got to rebuild, restore America's faith in itself. And he did that. He brought people on board to help run his administration, and they understood the principles that he had championed. But his focus was on those 3 big issues, and he was quite successful in all those areas. If you recall, tax reductions, he wanted 30% across the board in individual tax cuts. Tip O'Neill said, no way, Jose. And Reagan said, yep, we're going to have that. And I might not get it all at once, but I'll get it over 3 years. And Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. Let's all remember that. The Democrats controlled the House of Representatives by large numbers. And while the Republicans controlled the Senate, all those senators didn't agree with Ronald Reagan. So, but he got the 30% tax cuts over a 3-year period. The first couple of years were very tough because we had a recession, but then we got the economy going, and we started off, I remind people, with double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates, and double-digit unemployment. It's hard to believe. It's hard to even remember back in those days. We haven't seen that really since those early days of the Reagan years. Conquered all that, turned the economy around, all the while he was rebuilding our national defenses. He did not want any helicopter pilot to be afraid that the screws put in his helicopter to make it fly were not safe. He wanted the ships rebuilt. We aimed for a 600 ship Navy and achieved it. And his point was, to quote another senator who was a friend of ours, he wanted to be, he loved peace. He wanted to be a dove, but he wanted to be the best armed dove on the block. And a strong national defense deters hostile activity by others. So he focused on rebuilding our defense. He talked about the Strategic Defense Initiative, believing that the federal government's responsibility was to protect all of the American people from any incoming enemy attacks. And then, of course, throughout all this, he focused on the American people, saying, you can do anything. And he did restore that American spirit. When he ran for re-election, we can remember the commercials, it's Morning in America again. And of course, he won the second election, the re-election, winning every state but Fritz Mondale's home state of Minnesota, and went into a second term with a robust economy, a growing economy. The Soviet Union was on the decline. He made great speeches communicating important principles to the world. We have reports from those who were prisoners in the Gulag archipelago that they would hear reported knocking on the walls with code and so forth, whispering in the cells about Ronald Reagan and his speech about freedom, and the flame of freedom burns in the hearts of every individual, and we were going to work to ignite that. And that gave them hope. And of course, we know then that the Soviet Union came tumbling down, so to speak, and the wall came down the year after President Reagan left office. So I think that he was successful in turning the ship of state around. He had great allies in the world with Pope John Paul II and Margaret Thatcher, of course. And I mean, that was just a wonderful thing to watch on the world stage. I tell you, Ryan, I really regret that you missed this. And I hope you can watch some videos. And I hope all of you young people who are with us tonight can watch some videos. Reagan had great humor. He gave great speeches. And it was just an honor and a privilege to be associated with him in his administration. And frankly, it was an honor to be an American citizen at that time. So, but let me stop there and say there's lots more we can talk about, but let's turn to a kind of a Q&A here and see what we can take up from there. Back to you, Mark.
I think what you say is really a great point about, Ronald Reagan being a salesperson for the Republican Party. And with the advent of technology, I would argue that that's still the case today, right? A lot of people, either, current leaders in the Republican Party, will cite in speeches, Ronald Reagan is what inspired me to be a conservative, and, future and upcoming leaders are able to watch that online. And I just wanted to point out, for those of you, I don't think we mentioned it during the introduction, have been working at the Heritage Foundation for a long time. And, Heritage, this history is also very tied to President Reagan, in the sense that Ronald Reagan really, made the Republican Party and the conservative movement more in lockstep, and Heritage was a big part of that in the 1980s. Maybe if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. I've been at the Heritage Foundation vice president for about 18 years since I left the George Allen administration in Virginia, where I was Secretary of Natural Resources. And one of the great elements of the history of Heritage is the Heritage Foundation wrote. It was kind of a virtual team that brought together the first mandate for leadership. And it was a 2-inch thick book that took every cabinet office and every agency and had a chapter on what should the conservative movement do in this cabinet secretary position or this agency. And Ronald Reagan was so impressed by that, he, at the first cabinet meeting, had a copy of that on the chair for every cabinet secretary and said, this is our blueprint. And needless to say, that helped put Heritage on the map for lots of people in we didn't call it the swamp then, but it was. And it really gave a great blueprint for the Reagan appointees who were coming in. I mean, everybody generally had an idea, but this was really a specific roadmap that talked very, very in great detail about the agenda, where we should go, what changes should be made, in a sense, what order that should be done in. It was wonderful. And that's a great book to actually get and look back at to see what dire straits we were in as a country at that time.
It's interesting to reflect on what a profound change was taken on beginning in 81 as a result. I know you were with American ACU, Americans Conservative Union, going back to the early 70s, and even including the Republican Party was certainly not as uniformly conservative as it is now. There was much more of a divide, and there was a sense going back to prior elections that somehow it would be impossible for a conservative to prevail in the way that Reagan did. He won. As you've already described, he turned a lot of that conventional wisdom on its head, but he also was able to accomplish a complete, 180 change in the direction of public policy. I'm hard pressed to think of really any time since then that we've had as much of a sea change from one office to another. Perhaps when President Trump was elected 4 years ago, but even then, it was not. I don't think it's been as sustained as Reagan was able to do.
Well, I think that that's right, Mark, and I go back to the idea of principles, and one of those core principles that Reagan had was not a political principle. It was I respect the individual American. I care about you. I care about your family. The family is the building block of our society, and we're going to make government get out of the way of families. They are better able to decide how they want to live their lives and the values that they want to carry on in their family. And they're much better able to spend the money they make than sending it far away to a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. and letting them spend it. So I think the American people understood that he respected Americans as individuals. And that was very, very important. I mean, I think that sometimes conservative candidates and Republican candidates come across as maybe green eye shade people. And we do care about the economics, and we do care about balancing the budget and not spending more than we should. But why do we love our country? We love our country because a republic form of government is a form of government that understands the rights of every individual are given to us from God. And we have banded together as citizens to allow government some of that power to protect our rights from people who might infringe upon them. And Reagan kind of communicated that, and I think in a very effective way. And that, I think, is very important. He was principled from a policy standpoint, but he was able to communicate those principles in ways that people understand. He was trying to make their lives better. And frankly, it transcended to the rest of the world. I remember one time I ran into a fella who was from Ghana. And he learned that I had worked for President Reagan. He said, "Can I hug you?" And he said, "My family and I used to listen to Radio Free Europe. And we heard the speeches of Ronald Reagan. And it inspired us to think, maybe we someday could be free too." So people all over the world were listening to these words of this great man and believing that they were speaking to him, that his words were giving voice to their hopes and dreams and desires, and encouraging them to think that they perhaps could be free someday too.
You've spoken a lot about the inspiration that Ronald Reagan's words carried, and kind of how that led to a lot of staying power for the Republican Party and for the conservative movement. Obviously this last election did not go quite as the Republican Party would have hoped. How do you think that we can best channel that same sort of inspiring message moving forward to try to retake the House and Senate and presidency in 2022 and 2024?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is we have to get the principles right. The rule of law is a very important principle that I think was violated in a number of states in this last election, to the shame of those state legislatures. Elections are to be governed by law, not by the whim of some secretary of state or some governor. State legislatures pass laws and they're supposed to follow that law. And I think that we across the country have to encourage our state legislatures to fix these problems, these election law problems. And, you know, it's a great privilege to be able to vote in an election for people who are going to govern us. And it's not something that should be taken lightly. I mean, it doesn't happen in every country in the world. And so we need to encourage ourselves and our friends and our family to get these election laws right so that it once again is a privilege and a responsibility. You know, I don't like it when people say, oh, so-and-so cost us the election. Listen, each individual voter in America has a responsibility for their vote. And from the time I was able to vote, I not only counted it as a privilege to be able to vote, but as a responsibility. That doesn't mean that every election that I voted in, I love the people who were on the ballot, but you have to make choices when you live in a republic form of government. You've got to make choices and you've got to show that you're willing to live up to that responsibility. So, Ryan, I do think that we as Republicans and we as conservatives need to be very, very assertive about making sure that the principle of the rule of law is put in place in a very clear, unambiguous way for future elections, starting in Virginia and New Jersey this year, but carrying on into 2020 and 2022, and not allowing the whim of some secretary of state or some governor who wants to be able to do things their way to violate the rule of law, which is really sacred in our country.
You know, looking back, you talked about how the Reagan was able to articulate the vision of letting average Americans have more control over how they spent their money and how they lived their lives. I'm struck as we get ready for the Biden administration and the Green New Deal light. I know you've in the past have worked a lot in, you worked at Interior, you were in the Governor Allen's cabinet. It does seem that while for the last 4 years, some of these climate crisis agenda items have been kind of put on the back burner, they're now very much front and center, and they provide kind of a context of giving more power to government and more power to decide how people ought to live their lives. What are your thoughts about that, and how does that jive with where we were, say, go back 40 years ago?
Well, listen, this is, I think, is a very, very, very important issue for Republicans and conservatives to examine. When I was Secretary of Natural Resources for George Allen, I've told the story many times to people. My husband and I used to drive. I went out and did speaking all the time because I would get terrible press. And every time we would pass a construction site, a highway, a pharmacy, a school, an apartment building, I'd say, I could have stopped that. I could have stopped that. Environmental laws and regulations control economic activity in the United States of America. Environmental laws and regulations control the defense establishment in the United States of America. There's almost nothing that you can do that is not touched by environmental law and regulation. And access to energy, a secure form of energy that's available and affordable to every American, is the engine for economic growth. So this Green New Deal is the whole ball of wax, just like in the early 70s, late 60s and early 70s, when they started the EPA. It's consolidating a very powerful force into big central government. Why? To control our lives. That's what their goal is, to control our lives. And I don't know how many people watching were paying attention to this ice storm in Texas. But, this whole press by the Biden administration for, alternative renewable energy, the wind turbines out there in Texas got frozen. The solar panels all were covered with snow. They had to bring in equipment using fossil fuels to get these things going again. The bottom line is we want to have our economic system provide all kinds of energy sources, all kinds of environmental improvements. But we have to keep in mind the facts of the matter. And the fact of the matter is global warming is not a crisis. And we do not have to engage in draconian actions like the Clean New Deal, the Green New Deal, to solve a problem, a crisis that does not exist. We need to focus on economic growth and economic activity that allows the people of the United States of America to take care of themselves and their families. And as environmental challenges come along, because we have economic growth and because we have new technologies that our entrepreneurial class are developing, we will come up with solutions to those environmental challenges. I fear very much that the Biden agenda, the Green New Deal, the Kerry putting us back in the throes of the Paris Climate Accord will do great damage to our economy. And it's only thanks to the 3 years of the Trump economy before the Chinese communist plague attacked us. The 3 years of economic growth and deregulation and tax policy that has us on a glide path to hopefully survive this complete reversal in policy in a very unwise direction that I see us going in.
So you talked a lot throughout the episode, both with the Green New Deal and with HR1, about the federal government kind of using its overbearing brute force to try to control the lives of everyday Americans and federalize our elections and that sort of thing. How do we push back against that, as conservatives, and show, we do want elections that are accessible to people. We do want, clean air and water. I see in 2000, you wrote a book about how you were able to clean the air and water in Virginia, despite the overregulation from the EPA, not because of it. Like, how do we push back against those sorts of emotional arguments?
Well, it's a very tough challenge. I would say that the first thing that we need to do is we need to recognize that the young people today in grade school and junior high school and high school and even college are not getting a good education in science. So they're actually starting their adult lives behind the 8 ball of not knowing what the truth is. And it's very hard to go into a situation and debate people who have become closed-minded about these issues and not interested in truth. We talk in the free market movement about science is a tool of public policy. It should not dictate public policy. We elect people to office because we want them to take a variety of things into consideration. So I would say the first thing that we need to do is we need to grow the numbers of people who are open-minded, seeking truth, and not closed-minded. In other words, don't go looking for debates. Go looking for opportunities to deal with people who want to learn and want to have economic growth. Actually believe that free minds solve challenges that we have. And I think that there are many, I think we have 70 million plus people in the country who've shown us that they want more ordered liberty than big government. And we need to bring those people into our sphere of influence, if not into our parties officially, but into our sphere of influence, so they are committed to vote for people who also want free minds and free people.
It strikes me.
Now, let me just say very quickly, I used to give lectures to candidates about environmental issues. And I'd say, listen, you do have to recognize that if you want the broad electorate to pay attention to you on environmental issues, natural resource issues, you have to demonstrate a commitment to improving the quality and conditions of the environment in your community. And in Virginia, we used to go out and have thousands of people across the Commonwealth volunteer to clean up parks and rivers and creeks and, the little, corner park down at the corner in their own backyard, and engage in water quality monitoring and all kinds of things that would get citizens involved. And candidates for office have to show a demonstrated interest in this as well in their own local community. We don't need to tackle the global climate change Paris deal every day with people, but we can show them that we care about the quality and condition of the environment in our community, and then they'll be open to listen to us when we have to tackle those bigger issues.
It's interesting. There's kind of almost a religious or deeply ideological component to it. I know it comes as a surprise to some folks when you talk to them about the decline in CO2 emissions in the United States, primarily as a function of the transition to natural gas, which has been successful. But the issue, though, is we're being expected to do so much more than the Chinese, who basically get a pass for a couple of decades. Who knows what'll happen when their deadline comes. That really, I find that there's really very little awareness of the actual numbers. So I think your point about science is really right on, of being able to describe what's actually happening, as opposed to this kind of ideological, we have to do something, therefore we gotta, stop eating meat or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I think it is a challenge because young people Ryan's age don't remember the days when in New York City and Los Angeles, people sometimes wore masks on the street, not to protect them from the Chinese communist virus, but to be able to not breathe in polluted air. Before there was any national law passed, any national clean air law passed, the elected officials in those cities began to take action because they knew they needed to clean up the air in those cities. Very few young people today really know what dirty air is. I mean, I suppose they could travel somewhere else in the world and experience dirty air, but the United States of America began before there was a National Clean Air Act to clean up the air quality in our cities. And it's through technology and economic growth, and wealthier people want a healthier environment. Okay. And we just need to get that information down ourselves and then be able to communicate that effectively to other young people. And you should not give up your liberty. We should remember, we don't want to give up our liberties. We want to use our liberties to allow our free people with free minds to come up with solutions to any challenges that come upon us.
I think that's very, very well said. So tell me what you're working on these days. What do you see as your big challenge for the coming year?
Well, I work in my role as the Ronald Reagan Distinguished Fellow at Heritage. I'm very privileged to not kind of be in the chain of command anymore. So I spend a lot of time providing leadership to other conservative organizations and coalitions to focus on things like this HR1 that I've spoken about today, to mentor young people. I have many, before the Chinese communist virus came along, I had many, many meetings with young people, interns, young professionals around town who just wanted to get a sense from someone who'd been around the block a few times, kinds of things that they should be focusing on. So I do a lot of mentoring. I sit on boards. I'm on the board of an organization that provides an alternative professional opportunity for teachers, for instance, so they don't have to belong to the NEA and yet can be in a professional association. I do lectures out across the country. And so I try to stay busy, but I tell people, because I love people and I love the principles that have allowed us to be free and prosperous, my work is my avocation, and I feel very blessed to be able to continue doing it.
So
I might say parenthetically, I'm on the Reagan Ranch Board of Governors, and there's a private organization that owns President Reagan's ranch in California now, and so we oversee the management of the property, and it's not open to the public, but conservatives and conservative organizations are able to go and visit. I do want to say that if anyone who's on our call, I don't mean to sound like a commercial here, but if you were interested in supporting the Reagan Ranch, if you wanted to send your contribution to me at the Heritage Foundation, I would be delighted to send you a token of appreciation, something from the Reagan years. I have quite a collection of things, and I love to share them with people who love President Reagan, just so they have a reminder. And it also allows me to talk about the ranch and help this private. It's not the government that's managing the ranch. It's a private sector organization. And so we like to keep that alive.
Seems appropriate to me. Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, we'll have Dwight distribute the information on where people can send their donations in our next newsletter when we send out this video. I guess, before we close off, if you had any final thoughts you wanted to share, and then if not, I wanted to thank you again for joining Mark and I for this interview.
Well, let me just say what a delight it is. When Dwight first contacted me, I didn't even have to think about it. I said, yes, let's come up with the date. I think it's important that we keep the spirit of Ronald Reagan alive, that we encourage young people like Ryan and his colleagues to watch the tapes of President Reagan in action, read some of his speeches, so see how he communicated principles. And then for people our age, well, you're younger than I am, Mark, but for people who are adults, let's say, we need to remember that we elected Ronald Reagan president and turned the ship of state around, not only for the United States of America, but for people all over the globe, so that they had hope and opportunity for freedom. And that's the message we want to communicate. So thanks again for including me.
Thank you very much. And that ends our show. I was